My name is Avery Clark. I'm 31 years old. And at 11:51 p. My mother sent me a message that felt less like a text and more like a verdict. We talked. You're no longer part of this family. 30 seconds later, my brother Mason reacted with a little red heart, as if erasing me was something worth celebrating. But what they didn't know was this. That message wasn't an ending. It was the first crack in a wall they had spent years building out of lies. Because before the sun came up, I would uncover forged signatures, stolen inheritance money, and a secret my mother once used to hurt me. And that was the night everything shifted. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only one who's ever been betrayed by their own blood. And if you've ever been pushed aside, used, or treated like you were disposable, hit like and subscribe. This story, it's about what happens when the quiet one finally stops paying the price. I grew up in a house where silence was never quiet. Even when no one spoke, something was always cracking under the surface. My parents' marriage, my mother's nerves, my father's patience, or sometimes just a glass left too close to the edge of the counter. I was 10 when I learned that being the oldest meant being the referee, the buffer, the child expected to solve problems she didn't create. One night, I remember lying in bed listening to Lorraine and Ronald scream about money. Their voices bounced off the walls like they were boxing in the hallway. Mason, only 6, then, slept through the chaos with the peacefulness of a child who knew someone else would always clean up after him. I crept out of my room, sat at the top of the stairs, and watched shadows fight against kitchen light. I didn't know it then, but that moment planted the first seed. If I stayed quiet, maybe everything would break less violently. By middle school, my mother had perfected her routine critique, me 7. Comfort Mason. At dinner, she'd pile mashed potatoes on his plate, laugh at his jokes, and toss a quick Avery. Straighten your shoulders in my direction. The sound of metal cutlery scraping against plates always made my chest tighten. I learned to swallow food the same way I swallowed emotions quickly, without tasting anything. A small memory stays with me. 7th grade awards night. I won first place in a statewide science competition. My parents clapped politely. But when Mason scored 8 points in a middle school basketball game the following month, they bought him a cake, balloons, and a new pair of sneakers. I stood in the doorway that day, smelling vanilla frosting and rubber soles, realizing the math of my worth didn't add up. Eleanor, my grandmother, was the only one who saw me without asking for anything. Her house always smelled like old books and lavender soap. She'd sit me at her kitchen table, pour tea into mismatched cups, and tell me stories about women who refused to shrink just because the world expected them to. Once, when I was 16, she put her hand over mine and whispered, "People will take and take until you close the door. Don't wait too long. Sweetheart." I didn't understand it then. I thought she was being dramatic, but that sentence would return years later, like a quiet prophecy. When I turned 25 and the first foreclosure notice appeared on my parents' doorstep, they called me sobbing. I had barely been paying my own rent, living on microwave meals in a shared apartment, but I transferred the money without hesitation. My mother called me her savior, her voice thick with gratitude. I didn't know that gratitude had an expiration date. I didn't know it then, but every dollar I sent home was building the staircase they'd later push me down. By the time I graduated college, the pattern was carved into me like grain in wood. I worked, they needed. I saved, they spent. I planned, they collapsed. And every time they collapsed, they landed right on top of me. I told myself it was love, responsibility, the price of being the dependable one. But looking back, it was conditioning years of being told that stability was my job and comfort was Mason's birthright. I still remember my first real paycheck. I held it in my hands like it was proof I was finally an adult. I should have been excited. Instead, Lorraine called that same evening, her voice trembling. The car insurance lapsed again. Mason needs it for work. Could you just handle it this month? This month became every month. Mason quit that job 2 weeks later. Holiday seasons were the worst. Thanksgiving smelled like burnt turkey and unspoken resentment. Christmas was wrapped in lopsided expectations. Lorraine would hand Mason gifts stacked almost to his knees, electronics, new clothes, things he'd hinted at for weeks. My gifts came in flat envelopes, usually a card with a sentence like, "We're proud of how responsible you are." Responsibility had become my only identity in that house. One Christmas, I brought a homemade pecan pie. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. baking it in my tiny apartment kitchen. When I placed it on the table, Mason snorted. "Pie. Did you run out of money for a real gift?" Lorraine laughed like it was harmless. Ronald didn't even look up from the TV. I swallowed the sting and forced a smile. But the sweetness of the pecans turned to ash in my mouth. There was another flashback I never forgot. A late summer afternoon, maybe 3 years before the night they cut me off. I walked into their house and overheard Mason complaining. "Avery acts like she's better than us just because she pays a few bills. A few bills. The electricity, the water, the property tax, the emergency repairs, a few bills." Lorraine shushed him, but not to defend me. "Don't worry," she whispered. "One day she'll understand her place." Her place. That sentence slid into my spine like a cold blade. The last Sunday dinner before everything fell apart came 6 months ago. The air smelled like garlic bread and tension. Lorraine corrected my posture in front of Ronald's cousins. Mason bragged about a business trip I knew was actually a beach weekend. Ronald joked that I was too uptight to keep a relationship. I smiled through all of it, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. I thought enduring their disrespect meant I was strong. Now I see it for what it was. The slow erosion of self. What I didn't know then was that these small cracks, every ignored achievement, every borrowed dollar, every insult packaged as humor were leading to something much darker. Something already brewing behind closed doors. Something they'd soon weaponize against me. The weeks leading up to the night they exiled me weren't peaceful. They were a tightening noose I didn't recognize yet. It began with a voicemail from Lorraine. The kind she left when she wanted something but didn't want to state it outright. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Avery. Sweetheart. The electric bill's gotten out of hand. I don't know what happened. Maybe the rates went up. Could you take a look?" I opened the bill later that night. The rates hadn't gone up. Mason had. His gaming PC alone could have powered a small village. Still, I paid it without saying a word. Old habits are hard to kill. 2 days later, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a stack of mail Lorraine had accidentally forwarded to me late notices. Subscription renewals. Random receipts. All things she had no intention of paying. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "You're better with numbers." A request dressed as a compliment. My chest tightened the way it used to when I was a kid, listening to them fight in the kitchen. Then came the Facebook post. Lorraine uploaded a picture of Mason at some brunch, smiling with a mimosa in his hand. Her caption read, "Some children stay close. Some forget who raised them." No names, but I felt the ground tilt under me. That post earned 47 likes and several comments, little digital nods feeding her narrative. I didn't reply. I didn't call. Silence used to be my shield. I didn't realize it was becoming the rope she'd hang me with. Mason texted me next. "Mom saw you ignored her again. You know she's not well. Why are you being difficult?" Being difficult? That phrase rattled in my bones. When I didn't answer, he followed with, "Whatever. Can you send $300? Rent's weird this month." Weird. Right. Jordan noticed the shift before I admitted it. We were at a small coffee shop with flickering neon lights when she leaned in. Eyes narrowed. "They're pulling something. Ave. I can feel it." I brushed her off. "They're just being themselves. That's exactly why I'm worried." She said, "They only get this quiet when they're planning something." Around that time, Aunt Miriam called me out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken in years. Her voice wavered like she wasn't sure she should be saying what she was about to. "Your mother's been talking. At the last family dinner, she said something strange. Said you weren't fully Clark." Everyone laughed, but she kept going, like she wanted people to believe it. My stomach dipped. Why would she say that? "She was drunk," Miriam whispered. "But drunk people tell the truth they want to hurt with." Another week passed, and Ronald called with forced cheeriness. "Hey, Kiddo. Any chance you can front us the property insurance this year? You know how it gets." "Dad, that's almost $2,000. He went key it for a beat. Family helps family. Avery. Family helps family translation. You help everyone and get nothing in return. But the worst blow came when I checked an old shared Google Drive folder. I hadn't opened it in years. That was where I found it, that first flicker of real danger. A scanned document, my grandmother's house deed. My signature, except I had never signed it. My hands went cold when I zoomed in on the signature. It was my name, my handwriting, but not my stroke. The loop on the A was wrong. The tail on the Y too short. Whoever forged it had studied me, practiced me, worn my name like a mask. I stared at that document for a long time. The room unnervingly quiet. The only sound was the hum of my refrigerator and my own heartbeat beating like a slow alarm. I didn't panic. I didn't text anyone. I just sat there with a kind of clarity that feels like falling through ice. The next morning, Lorraine called. Not to explain. Not to check on me. She called because the Wi-Fi at the house had been cut off. Avery. Something's wrong with the account. Fix it. Her voice wasn't worried. It was annoyed, like I'd forgotten my chores. I let a beat of silence stretch. Did you authorize something on the deed? She paused too long. What deed? The house. Grandma's house. Honey, you must be mistaken, she said lightly. We've all been under stress. Don't start imagining things. But her voice cracked on the last word. And that crack told the truth. That night, Mason sent a voice message slurred. Angry. Half coherent. You think you're better than us. Mom said you're going to pull some legal crap. Don't. Just don't. You'll ruin everything. Everything. The word stung. Everything for who? Jordan insisted we meet again. Her office smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. A sharp contrast to the storm rising inside me. I slid my phone across the table. Screen glowing with the forged deed. She studied it. Her jaw tightening. Avery, this isn't an accident. This is planned. Look at the date. I looked. 3 weeks earlier. Why that date? I whispered. Jordan exhaled slowly. That's the week your mother and Mason met with an estate advisor. They tried to move assets. I think they were preparing to cut you out officially. This isn't just manipulation anymore. This is fraud. Fraud. The word felt heavy. Final. Like a door slamming shut behind me. The next escalation arrived wrapped in fake sweetness. Lorraine invited me to Sunday dinner just to talk things out. Against every instinct. I went. I needed to see. To hear. To confirm. The moment I stepped through the door, the house smelled different. Fresh paint. New teal. Updated kitchen counters. Renovations. Expensive ones. Renovations my grandmother's money had once been earmarked. For money meant to be split between us. I touched the marble counter and whispered, When did you get this done? Lorraine smiled. Too fast. A friend helped. Mason snorted from the couch. Yeah. A very generous friend. The air thickened. I felt my stomach twist. I knew that tone. Aunt Miriam's voice echoed in my head. Drunk people tell the truth they want to hurt with. And Lorraine had been drinking the night she hinted I wasn't fully Clark. The final push came later that evening. I overheard them in the hallway, Lorraine hissing through her teeth. She needs to sign the transfer. If she resists, we'll tell her the truth. Mason. What truth? Lorraine. The truth she's never been ready for. Then silence. I stood frozen in the dark dining room. My pulse loud in my ears. Whatever truth they meant, it wasn't love-based. It wasn't gentle. It sounded like a weapon they'd been holding in reserve. And I realized something then. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what they'd taken from me. That was the night the fear inside me began to rot into something sharper. Determination. The night everything finally snapped was colder than it should have been for early fall. Wind pushed against my windows like it was trying to warn me. You set at me disk. The forged deed open on my laptop. The room lit only by the glow of the screen. My phone buzzed again and again, calls. Texts. Missed notifications piling up like debris before a storm. Jordan had filed the freeze orders an hour earlier. The gears were already turning. At 9:17 the building's intercom crackled. A voice thin. Trembling. Avery, it's Mom. Please let me up. I didn't move. 10 seconds later. The pounding began. Slow at first. Then, frantic. Avery. I walked toward the door. Each step measured. The hallway light seeped through the cracks under the frame. When I opened the door just an inch, the scene looked almost theatrical. Lorraine stood there. Mascara streaked. Hair frizzed from the wind. She clutched the railing like she needed it to stay upright. Behind her, Mason paced like a caged animal. Ronald hovered near the elevator, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes darting anywhere but me. Avery, Lorraine whispered, reaching her hand toward the door. We need to talk. Please. We're losing everything. The accounts? The house? What did you do? Her voice wasn't frightened for me. It was frightened for her lifestyle. I opened the door just enough to show my face. I corrected the books. I said. My tone was level. Emotionless. It scared even me. Mason stepped forward. Jaw clenched. You think you can just freeze our lives? What is wrong with you? Don't talk to her like that. Ronald muttered weakly. But he didn't move to stop his son. Lorraine pushed past him. We're family. Families forgive. Families fix things. You don't do this to your own blood. There it was, the script she always used. I took a slow breath. Family doesn't forge signatures. Her face twitched. Just for a moment, but I saw the truth land like a punch. You misunderstood, she said quickly. You always overthink. We were just preparing paperwork. You're too emotional about these things. Emotional. God. The irony. I knelt beside the small table near the door and picked up the envelope I had placed there hours earlier. Legal documents. Certified. Clean. Lethal. I handed it to her. This is the fraud report. The asset freeze order. And the notice of pending investigation. You'll want to read all of it before you pretend you don't know what's happening. Mason snatched the envelope from her and ripped it open. His eyes scanned the pages. The color drained from his face. Mom, this says. I know what it says. She snapped, grabbing the papers back. Her voice cracked into a shrill. Disparaging. Avery. Stop this. You're ruining us. I didn't ruin anything. I said softly. I just stopped paying for it. Lorraine's legs wobbled. She dropped to her knees like the hallway had been yanked out from under her. She pressed both hands to her face. How could you do this to your family? I crouched down, meeting her eye level. My voice dropped to a whisper sharp enough to cut. You cut me out first. I'm just honoring your decision. For the first time in my life. Lorraine Clark had nothing to say. No guilt. No manipulation. Just stunned. Hollow silence. Mason lunged toward me. Rage boiling up. You don't get to walk away. Ronald grabbed his arm. Voice trembling. Enough. Mason. He said it too quietly to matter. But for once he said it. I stood, closing the door halfway. The hall seemed to grow colder. Us playing. This is done, I said. Go home. Lorraine looked up, eyes red, tears streaking her cheeks like war paint. We don't have a home, she whispered. I didn't flinch. That's not my problem anymore. Then I closed the door. Not slamming it. Not dramatic. Just a final, clean, click, the sound of a decade-long spell breaking. The hallway went quiet long before my heartbeat did. I stood with my back against the door, staring at the faint vibration still humming through the wood. Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Broken. Uneven. Like a family trying to find balance on legs they'd never used before. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to follow, to fix down, to soften the blow. I just breathed. And the air tasted different. Clean. Cold. Mine. I walked back to my desk. The apartment dim except for the glow of my laptop. Jordan had emailed minutes earlier. The subject line read, Phase 2. Inside was a single sentence. They thought the deed was the biggest discovery. Check the files I attached. I opened them one by one. Old bank records. Transfers I didn't recognize. A trust account Eleanor had set up years before she died, one I didn't know existed. And then the line that made my pulse still. Primary beneficiary. Avery Clark. Not Mason. Not Lorraine. The account had been quietly drained over the last 18 months. $40,000 disappearing in small, calculated withdrawals, each authorized with a signature that looked like mine but wasn't. Jordan's next message arrived seconds later. This was bigger than they admitted. And it's not over. The court will want answers. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the frozen numbers on the screen. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory, soft, steady, prophetic. Don't wait too long to close the door. It struck me then. I hadn't just closed it. I had locked it. And now, I finally held the key they never wanted me to find. Outside my window, the city lights flickered like tiny warnings or tiny blessings, I couldn't tell which. On the balcony across from mine, Theo Grant stepped out with a mug of coffee, glanced over, and gave a small nod, as if he could sense the shift in the air around me. They thought cutting me off would break me. What they didn't realize was that it freed my hands, and my story was just picking up speed. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you already know the kind of silence I'm learning to live with. Now quiet, steady, earned. And if any part of my story hit a nerve, stay with me. There's so much more ahead. The investigation. The truth my mother tried to bury. The part of the inheritance they never imagined I'd uncover. Subscribe. Turn on the notifications. And tell me your story in the comments. Because this chapter may be closing, but trust me, this one isn't over.